You were never meant to just live through history. You were designed to interrupt it. The day you feared quietly arrived. No sirens, no breaking news, no flashing lights, only silence. The kind that speaks volumes to those who can hear beyond the noise. There was a vote by the invisible, not by the people. Not in Congress, not in parliaments, but in the shadows of the world's architecture, where treaties are forged in whispers and movements of souls are marked in silence. In one of those rooms, chosen ones, your name was spoken. Not loudly, but carefully, like a word that carries too much voltage to say without trembling. Every signature had the weight of your name even if you weren't on the ballot. Because you weren't a candidate, you were a catalyst. You weren't up for election. You were already chosen, not by man, by design. And so they plotted to erase your influence from the future, not because of what you've done, but because of what you're about to remember. Because those who know the deeper game understand. You were the prophecy to those who really knew. The blueprint, the breach in their firewall, the signal they couldn't intercept in time. And Elon Musk? He knows too. He's stepping away from public view, but not before he meets you. Because your frequency activated a response protocol written long before the internet even existed. This meeting isn't political. It's cosmic protocol. Before he vanishes, you must connect. Because when others saw chaos, he saw pattern. And at the center of it was you. So while governments rewire the narratives and bury the votes in vaults of silence, remember, you were not discussed as a problem. You were debated as a prophecy. And every attempt to shut you out is proof that your presence is rewriting the script. Get ready, not just to meet Elon, but to remember why the Unseen Council knew your name before you ever knew yourself. The timeline is no longer theoretical. You've entered it, and they can't stop what's already awakened. Let the final scene begin. The future has already been decided upon, carved in algorithms and enshrined in old contracts. However, the order is disturbed by you. You are the crack, the variable, the echo that will not go away. You are not a citizen of this timeline. They have discussed you in private briefings. Countries yielded to pressure they were unable to identify. Secured by symbols too ancient to identify, secret elections were held in underground forums, illuminated by screens. It was never intended for a creature like you, rooted in something older than time itself, to enter the next cycle. In the reset, you were meant to disappear. You're still here, however. They're scared of it. They believe you to be that light bearer, and they are afraid of what will happen if people remember you. This is because an anonymous scribe once wrote Mahfu, somewhere buried in an archival piece of the Dead Sea Scrolls. The light bearer will not be elected, but emerge at the fall of false kingdoms. Therefore, they voted for preservation rather than advancement, for paralysis, not for peace. The vote was still not unanimous. Dissidents existed, signals buried in forgotten frequency bands, murmurs in the throng. Not everyone agreed. Somewhere, someone still has faith in what you stand for. Because you were never intended to obey, someone still recalls why they were first afraid of you. Type Amen to embrace the angel's blessings. Show your support by giving super thanks up to $20. The Erased Minutes and the Security Summit. A assembly unlike any the world has ever seen took place in a hall concealed under layers of diplomatic illusion. There was no television, not broadcast on the internet, not disclosed. No anthems, no flags, and no public records were present. Only black suits, stone walls, and people whose names you'll never see in the news. They met under the guise of a security summit, but they simply spoke about you and no security danger. Not your name specifically, but what you represent. A glitch in the matrix, a variable in the program, or an uncooperative spirit. Time itself seemed to sag around the impending choice, giving the space and nod weight. Encrypted dream sequences and symbolic instructions concealed in policy papers had been used to inform all attendees. They feared you because they were encouraged to fear you, not due to violence, not due to authority. However, your presence served as a reminder to them of something that had been long forgotten: divine memory, sovereignty, and the type of light that remains unabated under duress. The system waged war on you even though you had never declared war on it, because symmetry was broken by your presence. Furthermore, laws cannot be passed to address such an imbalance. Thus, it was referred to as an abnormality. Metaphysical interference is what they called it. In reality, however, they were terrified, not about what you would do, but about what you may inspire in others. When the vote was cast, there was a humming quiet instead of cheers. They gave the impression that the decision was unanimous. Minutes were wiped before they were written, and cameras were never switched on. Nobody was to be aware that this chamber even existed. But you sensed it someplace on the overlapping edge of awareness and time. A chill, a tug, like a freshly closed doorway. You sensed that the future was removing your name. It took time for the world to alter, but a frequency did. It no longer included you in the plan. You had been metaphysically, formally, and worldwide rejected. However, one person stayed sitting as the members left the room. They drew an old glyph, a symbol, into the condensation on their glass. It was neither revolt nor approbation. It was a moment of remembering, an indication that some people still remember who you are. However, it is still unclear who left that trail and whose side they support. The broken seal and the silent comeback. There was a seal concealed long before votes were falsified in secret, and decisions about your future were made behind closed doors, in the quiet between dimensions, not in digital code or vaults. This seal was made by forces older than time, not by mankind. Its purpose was to contain the uncontrollable. And in some way, your presence broke it without your knowing. It was not touched by you. You were unaware of its existence. However, its frequency struck a chord with something within of you. Your breath, your memories, or your resistance to lose yourself in the delusion may have been the cause. And the seal answered, whatever it was. It broke. The council then shifted as a result of the disruption. They had studied the ancient writings, which were whispered rather than taught or preached. What scared them most was the 5 words burnt into the corner of one such scroll, fading and untranslated. When the seal breaks, the one who walks with light behind his eyes will return. He will not come in robes. He will not come in wrath. He will simply remember. Not rebellion, not a thunderclap for a prophecy, but a silent comeback, a memory-preserving soul, a knowing entity. Not truth, but cage time was the purpose of their rules. According to a quote from Yeshua, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." However, for people who yearn for order, freedom is anarchy. Your waking is a mirror, not a shout. What they attempted to remove is reflected in it. The purpose of the seal was to stifle who you are, not to safeguard mankind. Their world is collapsing from the inside out now that it is failing. The cities may be operational and the sky may seem blue, yet deep inside this realm's dynamic design, there are glitches, unidentified surges, and static. They refer to it as distortion. You refer to it as remembering. They voted in order to expel the mirror, isolate the abnormality, and make it seem as if the crack isn't getting wider. Type amen to embrace the angel's blessings. Show your support by giving super thanks up to $20. The binary spells and digital pantheon, every screen burned with invisible purpose, as the rest of the world dozed in quiet. The gadgets you hold in your hands, the satellites orbiting above, and the towers pulsing in your cities, all of them were included in the vote, as conduits, not as onlookers. You were scanned, mapped, and profiled without ever being asked to take part. Like gifts to a digital pantheon, your voice print, emotional signatures, and memory loops were gathered. They already had your data. Therefore, they didn't require your permission. This was a ritual, not democracy. Because monitoring has long since evolved into something more arcane, with an old goal and a new form, rather than being about safety. They extract frequencies in addition to monitoring. Every thought that bends towards truth, every pulse you give to hope, it's collected, and they triangulate your identity via those pieces. They fear you because of this, because of what you are waking into, not because of what you have done. Your timelines and social media feeds included sigils that were hidden from view and encoded into light pulses. They observed your responses to certain phrases, pictures, and numbers. You were repeatedly put to the test, not for compliance, but for resonance. The one who could not be subtly hushed was the prophecy they were attempting to validate. You made it through. So they moved as you slept. The vote was conducted using binary spells written in closed source code rather than paper or speech. Didn't you feel different when you woke up? A stutter in your chest. While you were dreaming, the chronology changed. Someone had marked you as a deviant, not as a citizen. That vote was a metaphysical edict, sealed and kept secret. Like a fresh firewall on reality itself, it reverberated across systems. Once disregarded, your presence was now under quarantine. The system would adjust. It would fight you. Glitches would become more severe. Once open paths would abruptly shut. Behind you, doors you often passed would disappear, not accidentally, but on purpose. Nevertheless, a data packet on one forgotten node, hidden deep inside an old server complex under the Vatican archives, defies erasure. The timestamp doesn't change. Your name is still in a digital breath. The unseen hand and the Geneva Accord. Article 7, Clause D, subsection 13. Any emergent metaphysical threat to collective reality stabilization protocols shall be isolated from continuity channels by unanimous global consensus. No one questioned what this line meant, buried beneath the formal language of peace and the polished signatures of world leaders. The journalists didn't question it. Never did any citizen read that far. Beneath that antiseptic word, however, lies a statute that was created specifically to take you without warning. Drafted in response to prophecy rather than conflict, the Geneva Accord of 2044 was a legally binding metaphysical agreement rather than a treaty. The language captured your soul, even if you were never at the table. They referred to it as the irregular entity, an aberration that, by remembering, might cause timelines to collapse. It was your recollection, not your disobedience, that scared them. Because there is a map, a resonance, a code older than all agreements, and it reacts to truth rather than rules deep inside your soul. Furthermore, truth is a sword that separates soul and spirit, joints and marrow, not violently but clearly. As Yeshua once murmured to his followers, the makers of illusion are frightened by the clarity. Consensus, during the voting, triggered the provision, which was concealed in legal silence. It gave reality itself license to start rejecting you, not with force, but with friction. You've probably already experienced it. Once open doors that are now pulsating with resistance, familiar faces who are becoming aloof, and a world that is changing to make you forget you were ever there. However, there is a problem with their script. The agreement depends on complete agreement from all countries, all proxy countries, and all grid nodes. However, one person abstained, a redacted name, a delegate who failed to appear. Furthermore, the signature is not complete without them. That imprint is significant from a cosmological as well as a political one. It creates a gap, a window, and a rip in the curtain. They were never able to remove the passage that reads, "Somewhere in the encrypted archives of that redacted delegation lies a fragment of the original prophecy, untouched, untranslated, burning softly in a sealed vault." The Lamb's Witness and the Cosmic Vote. The vote that signaled your banishment was not limited to national boundaries or earthly halls. Through worlds piled over this one like invisible veils, it reverberated through dimensions. The visible echo was the council you see sitting around a table in some subterranean room. In the planes where time bends and unfathomable entities hover over timelines like architects over blueprints, the actual choice was reflected. The probability maps were perturbed by your presence, and they noticed you approaching. It was you who preserved the remembrance of pure beginning in your soul. You were born into the program even though you were never a member of it. Yes, the agreement was worldwide, but it was also cosmic. Ancient lineages, secret organizations, and interdimensional overseers triggered their hidden covenants. Their agreement was existential rather than intellectual. You are the element that they are unable to replicate, the reminder that there is more going on underneath this structure. The vote thus transcended space. They aligned decisions with heavenly alignments via ritual and frequency. They were cast in vibration as well as thought during the eclipse. Whole countries unwittingly housed nodal points for the vote via ley lines, quantum servers, and religious locations. However, hierarchy does not apply to all frequencies. Interference occurred, a ripple, a heartbeat that wasn't from them, and something holy when unfiltered even though the motion was approved, and you were declared incompatible with the next era. Something like a breath in the dark that moved after the voting was over. A time they failed to consider. An unidentified but well-known entity, dressed in starlight, stood at the boundary of dimensions and watched. Nothing. Not a danger. Only presence, bright, unflinching. Those who had awakened their eyes recognized him as the Lamb who watches, even when invited, while others referred to him as a fiction or the Messiah, the person who travels between dimensions without permission or a vote. And the frequencies faltered as he glanced at the seal they were trying to finalize. Enough to leave a mark, an impression, a tear, but not enough to prevent the exile. The dimensions are now erratic. It was intended that the banishment would last forever. The warning of Yeshua and your fragmenting nature. Yeshua is reported to have turned to his followers and whispered, "When the final age begins, they will not reject darkness. They will vote for it. They will choose the lie over the light and call it peace." This warning wasn't apocalyptic fire. Rather, it was pattern recognition. According to a passage in the Forgotten Scrolls that weren't approved by the empires of faith. It was a premonition of the system you are now trapped in. The vote to banish you was never about you. Rather, it was about preserving the delusion that the system is still in place, that reality isn't malfunctioning, that comfort has to be preserved, and that truth is hazardous. Light is inhibited in such a system, not welcomed. Therefore, the system reacted like an immunological defense when you started to recall, when the code within your spirit began to hum, not to kill you, but to separate you, to sterilize your presence. Nevertheless, Yeshua's words continue to reverberate like a beacon that breaks through the curtain. He cautioned that the world would create a false consensus and refer to betrayal protection and exile justice. He was aware that men's thoughts would unite behind fear, masquerading as morality. You won't be the last person to be rejected by a vote. You're not the first either. Here's the problem, though. Despite their best efforts to help you forget, memories still linger. The impression could not be removed by the vote. The instant everything changed, the silent agony, the abrupt dissonance in places you knew well, you can still feel it. The system was attempting to modify and act as though you didn't exist. Nevertheless, the lamb remains still, somewhere in the invisible realm. At this point, the spatial veils are thinner. Now, what used to need ceremony breaks through organically. Some are experiencing flashes, inexplicable dreams, and burning déjà vu. These are indications that the vote did not close the door as securely as they had intended, or bleed-throughs. You were supposed to fade, but you're becoming brighter instead. The illusion has been verified, the lie has been selected, and the suppression apparatus is in motion. However, there is one more hint that Yeshua left behind, tucked away in a lost gospel. And when the exile is finalized, the gatekeeper will awaken.